We are talking about why we yell at our kids and how the heck can we stop doing it. I know we're all guilty. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. This is really great information for all ages. My name is Dale Ecuyer. I'm happy you're with us today. I help families create harmony in the home using holistic mental wellness solutions. And I have Kelly Hutcheson here. She has a master's degree in child counseling, a teacher, and a parent of two. So Kelly is really passionate about this topic, and she's going to give us some amazing tips to help guide us in this parenting journey. It's not easy, right? It's like the hardest job on the planet.
It's definitely not easy. It's definitely not easy. And I thought that it was going to be easier for me because I had so much experience working with kids, and I was working in the schools. I was a school counselor. So I dealt with some severe behavior problems. I was a behavior specialist. I was also a first grade teacher. I worked K through 12 or K through 5 was my wheel of zone of happiness. I loved working with K through 5 students. So I thought going into parenthood would be actually a little bit easier for me because I had so much experience. But let me tell you, once my kids came out, and they just came out as they were, I turned into this super snappy, unhappy, stressful, on eggshells mother that I didn't even recognize, because at school, I was so calm and patient, and I had students who threw chairs at me. They spit at me out of anger. I had one time a kindergartner pull me down to the ground, and I was 6 months pregnant with my son. So I had a lot of experience with difficult behavior. And so I was always able to stay calm and steady Eddie during those moments. But for some reason, when I had my own two, again, in first grade, I had 26-year-olds. Can you imagine? 20, sometimes 25 6-year-olds. And then when I was a counselor, I had multiple classrooms, up to 50, 60 kids at a time when I was doing a lesson. And I could keep them, all listening, engaged. I was super calm. I was super patient. I was a happy, chipper person, I felt like, in the schools. And then at home, I was like Snappy Turtle. I was always giving lips. I called myself the pointy lip mom. I was always giving dirty looks, like very stern looks. And I was speaking to my own two children in ways that I would never dream of speaking to my students at my school. And I couldn't understand the disconnect. I was telling my husband, I'm like, I think I'm a better teacher and counselor than I am a parent, because I don't even know what's happening, but I'm like snappy. I'm on edge. I'm walking on eggshells. Everyone's just on high alert. What would happen is that let's say my daughter or my son, I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, but they were little at the time, 1 and 3. Let's say my daughter would quote unquote trigger me. Then I would have a big reaction, and I turn into Snappy Turtle. Then my husband, who's very defensive of me, he would have a reaction like, Lily, you can't do that. And then my son, who was just around and absorbing all the energy, he'd start crying just because everyone's all stressed out. So I couldn't figure it out. And then I read the book, The Conscious Parent by Dr. Shefali. And literally in that moment, my life changed forever, because I realized what the ego was. Now, we all have egos. There's nothing wrong with an ego. An ego is the bodyguard for the little girl inside of all of us, or the little boy for the dads. And the ego is always there to protect us. It's kind of like my dog. She's sweet as pie. She never barks. She never she's just sweet. All she knows is love and protect us. So when the Amazon delivery people come, she starts getting crazy. And I'm like, it's just an Amazon person. It's okay. So that's the way our ego kind of protects the little girl. It's almost like the guard dog. It's the guard dog against anything that is in danger. And even though there isn't anything danger with the Amazon, my dog Maggie thinks that there's a problem. So she gets all stirred up. And so what happens is when we go into parenting, we want to do it all the right way. We want to do it perfectly. We don't want to mess it up. We don't want to put them in therapy. I remember holding my daughter after 6 years of infertility and just whispering in my head. I didn't even know what I was even saying it, but I was saying, you can't mess this up, Kelly. You took this long, this much money, all these surgeries, all this in vitro, and my husband, it was quote unquote my fault. So, all the doctors were saying, it's Kelly's problem. It's Kelly's problem. So all that guilt that I carried on my own shoulders, I was holding my newborn baby going, you can't mess this up. After everything you put this family through, even though I was the one that I put my own blame on myself. I remember holding her saying, you can't mess this up. So I went through parenting so afraid of messing it up. So I was parenting from this fear-based place, and that's where I was messing it up. And so yelling never has to do anything with our child. It has everything to do with our ego and fear of not being good enough. And so the reaction sometimes comes from, sometimes parents will tell me, they're like, I just lost it. I saw red. It was over something so little. I don't know what happened. I don't even know who was speaking. And a lot of times the little girl inside of all of us who wasn't seen or wasn't heard when they were younger, sometimes they're like, okay, well, this parent didn't see me when I was little. And now we grow up and we have this little version of ourselves who's, not listening. And it triggers that old wound inside of us that has nothing to do with our child, because it has to do everything with the ego. And the ego gets roared up like, oh my gosh, the Amazon person's here. There's danger. And so when the child isn't listening, it rears up all of this stuff that was laying dormant. And the way that I knew this is that I never had any type of reactions like this in the school. 20 years in the schools, and I was like calm as a cucumber all the time, and dealt with much, much more severe situations than my child interrupting me while I was on the phone or not sharing or something like that. So I always encourage parents to know, when you know the why behind why you're yelling, and it always comes from fear and lack of not being good enough, then you realize that no child can ever push your buttons. They just push on your ego. And so when you know that, you can almost like allow the ego to be pushed. And then kind of like I tell Maggie, my dog, like, it's okay. It's just Amazon. It's okay. It's just FedEx. It's okay. It's just grandpa. We haven't seen him in a long time. It's okay. It's okay. And so when that emotion comes up, instead of reacting and doing the same thing we've always done, I encourage parents to look at that. What's there? What's that story? What's that story of trying to be perfect and not messing it up? Because I always encourage parents, I'm like, let's just all be B- parents. And then it takes the pressure off of our shoulders. And then it takes the pressure off our kids, that they have to be perfect, that they have to say please and thank you all the time. These are all things that we want to encourage, but we don't want to come from a place of, yelling at them to get them to comply. Because if you've ever been yelled at by a boss, a teacher, a coach, God forbid your parents, or someone else that's, in your life, how small that makes you feel. And so the child doesn't stop loving the parent when they're being yelled at. The child stops loving themselves. They stop liking themselves. They start thinking that there's something wrong with them. And they don't know how to comply and get what they need from the parents, because kids do well when they can. So just like my son's in 4th grade, I would never give him a chemistry book and say, go figure this out, figure it out, figure it out. Just like our kids, they don't know how to manage their emotions yet. And so just like I would never get upset at him that he doesn't understand chemistry, because it's way too advanced for him, we have to have the same type of compassion and empathy for our kids, that it's hard for them to manage their emotions. Because I'm 46 and sometimes it's really hard for me to manage stress and overwhelm and disappointment and frustration. So multiply that times 100,000 million, and that's how our kids feel. Because a lot of grown-ups, we have positive ways of managing our stress and we have negative ways. The positive ones we all know: the exercise, eating right, meditation, journaling, spending quiet time with yourself, and just spending time in nature. Those are all positive things. Then we also have negative things that we do to manage our stress. All of us do. We might be overeating, over Facebooking, over shopping, over drinking, over, some people vape, some people smoke, some way to get to manage that stress. Well, our kids have none of those strategies. They come literally with no strategies whatsoever. They don't even have the good ones or the bad ones. So the first line of defense is they're like, all right, let me see what mom or dad do when they're stressed out, because I don't know what to do with this vibration going through my body. It feels overwhelming. So they feel overwhelmed. They feel stressed out. They don't know what to do. So their first line of defense is, let me do what mom and dad do. So then they do what mom and dad do, which sometimes is yelling, snapping, like I was the pointy lip mom. Sometimes they do that energy and it's a reflection back to us. And instead of saying, oh, that child is teaching me where I need to grow and where I have some blind spots, we get upset at them for doing what we were doing to them too. I remember one time my daughter was yelling at me and I was like, you can't yell at me, as I'm yelling at her not to yell at me about yelling. And it was like, in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is lunacy. And I've had parents that say, well, they hit a brother, so I spanked them. And I said, well, that's sending the message. They're doing what you're teaching them to do during stress, because kids don't know how to manage stress. And even as adults, it's hard for us. So then we have to multiply that times 7 million. And that's how it is for kids, because they don't know how to manage stress. They look to see, what are mom and dad doing? And that's their first, whatever you want for your child. I always tell parents, whatever traits you want for your child. If you want your child to be more confident, have better self-esteem, be happier, be less moody, control their anger, whatever it is, write those down. And I've asked hundreds of thousands of parents, what do you want? What traits do you want for them to have? And the top 3 are usually happy, confident, and kind. There's millions others, but those are the top 3. My dad actually took the list. He compiled them into an Excel spreadsheet and gave a tally for each one of what was the most popular. And those came out top 3 over and over and over. So I always tell parents, if you want a happy, confident, kind child, then being a confident, happy, kind parent is the way to have that in a child. Now, I also want to encourage parents that your kids don't have to be happy all the time. I have this shirt. I call myself the Happy Hutchesons, but I encourage parents to let their kids know and let themselves know that your kids should not be happy all the time. That is not normal. That is not reality. That is like having your birthday every single day. You need that polarity of both sides of the emotions to appreciate the happiness. It's like my son says, I wish my birthday was every day. And I said, probably not, because if your birthday was every day, you would just think, oh, it's just like any other day. I'm getting a dozen presents. And so you wouldn't appreciate it because it only comes once a year. So the same way we teach our kids that your birthday can't be every day, I encourage parents to help their kids know that you don't have to be happy all the time. And that was a lot of pressure that I put on my kids when that's where the reaction was coming from, because I had a message in my mind that said, if your kids are happy, then you're doing a good job as a parent. And so when my kids weren't happy, then obviously that meant I was screwing up as a parent. And that's where my reaction was coming from. It was coming from lack. It was coming from not being good enough and messing it up. Because I was mostly a happy kid, I just assumed most kids were happy. And then when they weren't, which my kids are not happy all the time, then I was like, oh my gosh, something's gone wrong. It must be me. And then I made it all about me instead of teaching them about their emotional literacy and about their emotions and about these are normal. Yes, you can't hit your brother, but anger is completely normal emotion. So I help parents get comfortable seeing their kids uncomfortable, because the more that we tell them they have to be happy. I remember my daughter was 3 and she's like, I don't want to be the Happy Hutchesons. And this was when I was unconscious. I was so offended by that. I was like, what are you talking about? You don't want to be the Happy Hutchesons. She was saying, you're putting too much pressure on me to be happy and like just be this little perfect girl with the bow on her head. You're putting too much pressure on me. And this energy that you're putting on me is too much for me. And that's why my daughter was literally crying all the time, because she was trying to do what she needed to be doing, but she just was like, this is not realistic. So it was like holding that beach ball underneath water, like Brooke Castillo talks about, and that resistance of any emotion other than happy. I call them tricky emotions. I don't even like to call them negative emotions, but holding down that beach ball and that resistance was causing this like sense of angst within her. And that's why she was melting down all the time. My son, on the other hand, he wasn't crying all day. He was just angry all day. He's like, I would love to be happy, but I can't be happy all the time. So I was putting so much pressure. And sometimes we put pressure on our kids to be really good athletes, get straight A's, use your manner under any circumstance. You always have to be kind. You always have to be happy. You always have to be confident. I'm 46 and I'm not happy, confident, kind all the time. And so when we can go into these experiences like, oh my gosh, my kid's really having a hard time versus giving me a hard time, then we come from a place of empathy and compassion and say, oh, this is frustration. I felt that before. Because the goal is to change the behavior, but we never want to change the emotion. And that's what I was trying to do for so many years, and why I was so unhappy as a parent, because I was trying to change their emotions and I didn't want any tricky emotions because I was so uncomfortable with them uncomfortable. But when I was in the schools and I had a child or a student who was uncomfortable and having a hard time, I'm like, come here. I'm going to help you. We're going to figure this out. I'm on your side. Let's do this. Let's lock arms. What happened on the playground? What got in your head that you were throwing sand at your friend that you love so much? What's going on? Instead of like, you're going to time out, you're going to the corner. Like that would never work with a student. So I always encourage parents to think about, what do you need when you're feeling a tricky emotion? What do you need when you're sad? What do you need when you're frustrated? What do you need when you're angry? You don't need someone else piling on. When they're in the red zone, that's what your job is, to teach them, like, this is completely normal, this emotion. I feel this way sometimes too. And how can I help you? And so a lot of times kids, when they're in the red zone, there's no talking to them whatsoever. So sometimes I'll say to my kids when they get upset, which is literally every day, and that's okay, is I'll say, do you need help calming down, or you want to calm down by yourself? Because they're older, they have a whole plethora of strategies to pull from their tool belt. And sometimes they'll be like, I need your help. And sometimes they just need to go to the room. I'm like, get it out. Sometimes it just feels so good to cry. And so instead of always having them hold it in and you're being a brat, you're being a baby, I'm like, just get it out. And the more you allow it, it's ironic, the less it happens. Because a lot of parents tell me, especially of boys, well, I don't want to raise a crybaby. And I always tell parents the resistance is what's causing the constant crying. Not when the more you allow it, the less it happens. It happens with less intensity and less duration and less like so much of it, because they can like let it out. My son says it's like a good burp. A good cry is like a good burp. You just got to let it out. And I'm like, absolutely. And then you're just kind of like holding the space. And then when the situation's over, you can be like, what happened there? That was crazy. Oh my, can we do a rewind? And then you kind of like, then you can do the teachable moments. Then you can say like, what happened? Like, you lost your mind. I saw red across your forehead. That was crazy. And then you can also do the same with them. Like, what happened to mommy? Did you see? I was like crazy pants. I was like spinning around like a tornado when I was upset. So then you can kind of like connect. And when you have connection with your kids, they feel like you're on their side. Then you're going to have so much more cooperation because their fists aren't up. It's like me against you. It's more like me with you. And you're on my side. You have my back. And you're going to help me weather through any storm. But the more that we put so much pressure on them that they have to be happy, they have to be kind, they have to be confident all the time, then they just feel like they're going to collapse, and they're like scared of their own shadow. And that's how I can describe my daughter when she was younger: scared of her own shadow, wanted to climb back in my uterus, like just had no sense of her own personal personality because I was so afraid of messing it up. And I wanted to be the A+ parent. And I tried so long to be the A+ parent, and I failed miserably. I was getting F-, F-, F-. And then I found Brooke Castillo's work, and I was like, wait a minute, maybe I could just be a B- mom. So that's what I encourage parents to do. And then I allow my kids just be B-. You don't have to be perfect all the time. You can have human emotions. And I'm going to teach you what to do with these human emotions, because when you leave, when you're grown and flown in 940 Saturdays, you're going to need to know what to do when you're frustrated, when you're angry, when you're upset, when you're disappointed, and sad. All of these things are going to happen to you when you leave this house. So I want this to be almost like our emotional literacy lab within these 940 Saturdays, and to feel all the feels. And then the more you allow it, the less it happens with so much frequency and intensity and duration. And it doesn't really bother you. Like my kids get upset, I'm like, you're upset. That's cool. And then when I'm upset, they're like, you're upset. That's cool. They're not like freaking out and so scared. I was upset the other day about something, and my daughter was in the room like, this is getting kind of awkward. I'm doing the ugly cry, and you can leave. She's like, no, I'm just going to hang out here until you feel better. I was like, are you holding the space? And so I felt so much closer to her afterwards, even though it had nothing to do with her. But she saw me upset, and instead of running away, like, I'm going to leave, this is awkward, she's like, no, I can handle this. This is okay. And it felt so connecting afterwards. And I remember just the other day, my husband, I went out to lunch with a girlfriend who's struggling with so many medical issues. And being around her reminded me how much she's struggling. And so I got home from lunch, and usually I'm like, oh my gosh, we did this and this. And I was super quiet. And I'm not, obviously you can tell, I'm not a very quiet person. And he's like, cat out your tongue. Is everything okay? And I said, it's just so much to see how much she's struggling, and it's so hard. And he didn't say like, oh, well, good thing you were there, or you should call her more, or you should send flowers. He just said, yeah, I bet that's hard. And I was like, that was just that one word. Yeah, I bet that was hard. When someone gets you, it felt so connected just by, yeah, I bet that's hard, versus like, well, maybe you should call her more. Maybe you should text her more. He didn't try to fix it. And we always want to fix our kids' feelings instead of just being like, this is completely normal to have this human emotion. And then you feel so connected afterwards, and there's not so much like friction between you two. And then there's like, okay, you feel almost closer after the conflict. So then you're not so scared of the conflict, because you know when it comes up, afterwards you're going to grow and you're going to become closer even afterwards. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, yes. Are you kidding me? Light bulbs all over the place. And I'm hoping that people are listening to this, because it's such a mind switch. It's such a cooperative, harmonious, like that's what we want in our families, right? And if you can be, like you said this in another video that we did, you can be the lighthouse, right? Or you can be you said the flight attendant, right? Where if stuff is going crazy, they're kind of like looking at you like, okay, how are you handling this? Right. And that's their reference point. Like you're looking, I love when you gave that analogy, because it makes so much sense. If the mom has it together, she's calm during conflict, she's able to articulate how she's feeling without lashing out at someone.
I always tell parents, I'm like, what happens when you're upset and you call a girlfriend and you're a guy and you call your dad and you're like, I've had a really tough day. This was so hard. My computer shut down. My boss was upset at me. And you're just like, you're just venting to your friend. And if your friend is saying things like, get over it, act your age, you're being a baby, it doesn't breed connection between you and your friend. You're probably not going to call that friend again. What your friend says is, I know how you feel. I felt that before too. This is hard, and we can do hard together. It's almost like venting to a friend, and then you just feel so much better. And they've literally, when I was a counselor, I used to have teachers come in my office, and they had a 10-minute break, and they would just lay it. And then this student did this, and then my husband did this, and my son did this, and they would just go the whole gamut of 10 things. And I just sat there, I'm like, oh, that must be hard. That must be hard. And they leave, and they're like, I feel so much better. And I'm like, I said nothing. And it's almost like the less we do, the better, because I said nothing. And then they'd email me later. I feel so much better after our talk. Thank you for just listening to me and just being there. And I was like, I'd write back, I didn't do much. You just like let it all out. And it just felt like my son says like a good burp, and then you just feel so much better afterwards. And then you feel so much closer to that person. Like that teacher would write me and say, I feel so close to you. Thank you. What can I do? Can I buy you coffee? And I'm like, I've done nothing. I've done nothing. And that's what our kids need for us. They need to be that person that they can just let it all out, be themselves, and not have to wear all these like different disguises to like get our love and attention. And like all emotions are okay and all behaviors okay. And after the fact, we're going to talk about like, maybe you could have done something better. And then I will say like, maybe I could have done that better. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I underreacted.
Yeah.
Sometimes I overreact. Sometimes I overreact. Sometimes I underreact. Sometimes my husband overreacts. Like we're all just so flawed and awesome. So we're just all flawsome together. And nobody needs to be perfect. We don't even allow the P word in our house. Like the P word is considered a naughty word. Perfect.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And I think admitting to our kids, and I remember saying that to my kids, like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. You know what I mean? I've never had a 15-year-old yet. You know what I mean? So let's see if we can figure this out together, and just having that cooperation instead of being like, I'm the boss and I'm going to tell you what to do. Like it just doesn't work that way.
Right. I know
not
if it
want to have a
worked,
close
if what you're doing is working, I say keep doing it. And a lot of times, like my daughter, when she was in face-to-face school, she would get in the car and she's like, "Oh my gosh, my teacher! I had this issue, and I have a B in there, and I should have an A, and she didn't put in the grade, and then she put the grade in wrong. All these problems, and immediately my mommy brain goes like, all right, I need to email a teacher. I need to fix this, and I'm like, oh, that must be so hard. Like that must be so hard. You're like working so hard. You have an A, and she's giving you a B minus instead of like." And I'll say, like, I can't wait to see how you figure this out. Like, if you need me, I'm here. I'll go to bat. And she's like, no, I'm good. Like, she doesn't want me to intervene. So I've learned that from her of like how to like, oh, that must be so hard. How'd you handle it? I can't wait to see how you figure this out. I'm here if you need me, but I think you got it. Then it gives them their own wings. And then you just literally, like Bette Midler says, are the wind beneath their wings. And it's not like you micromanaging and emailing the teacher and fixing all the problems. It's like, you're going to figure this out, and I know you will. And I can't wait to see what you do, because sometimes your ideas are things I would never even think of.
Wow. I mean, the ultimate goal, right, is to prepare them for life.
Right.
You know what I mean? Teach them how to communicate, how to work through challenges and difficulties, like you said, and give them tools. So this is so brilliant. I know we could like talk for hours upon hours. All day long.
I'm obsessed with this topic.
I know. It makes such a world of difference. So how can people get a hold of you? I know that you do counseling. Do you have any courses right now, or what are you doing?
I think the best way to find my work to see if it resonates with you is through my podcast called Harmony in the Home. I dive so deep into the inner child and how our old wounds, we're always trying to fix our old wounds in current time. So the podcast is called Harmony in the Home. My husband actually coined the term. I was going to say tame the tantrums or no yell with Cal. And he's like, you don't want to always just pigeonhole into just parenting. Like you're going to talk about marriage and keeping your house organized. And so harmony in the home, because when you focus on what's happening in your four walls, and that is your ultra focus, then when you leave the four walls, life becomes so much easier, because when it's light and fluffy in the four walls, then when you leave your four walls, it's light and fluffy too. And I lived in a home, when my home that I created, this four walls, when the first couple of years as a parent, super snappy, super stressed. And then I leave the house and I was even more snappy and even more stressed. So I was able to flip the switch where now like there's lots of light and fluffy in the home. And now my life outside my four walls feels like very light and fluffy. So that's the gift that I want to give to other parents. And I talk about it all the time on the podcast.
So good. Oh, I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right. Well, thank you again, Kelly. Back again. I'll put information in the comments, or you can put them in the comments about how people get a hold of you, and maybe put an episode in. Can you do that?
Yeah. Any questions you guys have, I'm here. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks so much for being with me again. We will see you all again. I hope you found value. I'm sure you did.